James Fletcher here to talk about all things across the sport in college basketball. We're gonna talk about so much here on today's show. We got a great lineup here for you. In the first segment, we will talk about Bracketology. Just posted an update on On3. You can check that out. They are moving now. We've been updating that each Sunday. It will now be Thursdays and Sundays. Plus, on Wednesdays, we do a Bubble Watch where we give you the stock up, stock down, the teams that have moved the most over the past few days there on the bubble. We'll talk today in this first segment about the bubble. We'll talk about the top of the bracket. We'll even talk a little bit about the middle of the bracket, those kind of 4 through 8 seed teams that kind of make up the core of what we look for when we start talking about who could be upset and so on once we get to March. In the second segment, we're going to talk NBA draft because I also have a mock draft coming out later today, possibly tomorrow, kind of in the aftermath of the NBA trade deadline. On Tuesday, we talked about kind of the importance of the trade deadline to draft talk. Going to go through some of the players now on today's episode who you should be watching over the next month or so before we start March Madness. Then in the third segment, as always, we'll get you out of here with the games of the week, get you prepped for everything you need to watch as we turn our attention fully to college basketball. That's right. Yes, the NFL concludes its season on Sunday, which means we can watch college basketball pretty much uninterrupted through the end of the NCAA tournament. So let's go ahead and get into it then, because we have to talk about the NCAA tournament, kind of an evergreen topic in college basketball because everyone is always building their resume. Even in the off season, they're trying to build the best roster to get attention to improve their computer numbers as we start off each year. But now we're into February and we have plenty of data to point to as we talk about these teams. We'll start up at the top of the bracket where Auburn has clearly separated themselves from the rest of college basketball. There is no real peer that they have with their resume. You look at what they've done in quad 1 and quad 2, no bad losses. They're running through the SEC pretty much unscathed to this point, still undefeated, despite an injury to Janai Broome, which kept him out for just a little while. Now back, now healthy. They look like the team to beat across the sport so far. But there is one team kind of lingering there in that top tier. The Duke Blue Devils with Cooper Flagg under Jon Scheyer. And this is shaping up to be one of the most interesting races that we have seen in college basketball over recent years, where we've got the clear number one team in the country, Auburn, led by a graduate student, Janai Broome, who is concluding his college career before heading to the NBA draft, where I believe he will be a first-round draft pick. And then you've got number 2, Duke, who is really the only team with their sights within reach of Auburn, who could catch them on their own. Now, there is a situation where you look at a Tennessee or an Alabama with an opportunity to potentially knock off Auburn one or multiple times between now and Selection Sunday. So there is an open door there where these teams could prove themselves. But to this point, they have not been in the same category. So we're going to leave them in tier 2 for now until they can prove it out on the floor head to head. But we look at Duke and we look at the resume, what they've been able to accomplish, and it is nothing to look down on. They have been extremely impressive, especially as of late. They have looked like the cream of the crop in the ACC. Looks like they're going to just cruise through that conference. Yes, it's a weekend conference, but still, to get up and do it every night in league play is something that is difficult for any team to do. They have done it led by Cooper Flagg, who is kind of the inverse of Janai Broome. Janai Broome, a center prospect, like I said, graduate student last year of college basketball. Cooper Flagg, a freshman on the wing with the ball in his hand a lot on the perimeter, kind of being a playmaker. He's leading this Duke team in his only season of college basketball before he heads to the NBA to be the presumed number one overall pick. So we've got two completely different styles of play. We've got two rosters that could not be built differently. And yet they are the two that are at the top, proving that you can build your roster different ways across college basketball. There's so many ways that you can do this. You don't have to just fall in line with what anyone else is doing. Two more teams that are good evidence of that are the other teams that I think right now are on the 1 seed line. That's Alabama and Tennessee. They've kind of flip-flopped back and forth over the last couple of weeks, where whichever one has taken a recent loss might fall. One of them might pick up a big win, a bigger win in league play. Like, say they just had a matchup that week that happened to be against a team that was better than who the other team played. That could shift things the way that they are so tight in that race for that third spot on the one line. And then you've got Houston, who's really lingering right there. Really, really close. I mean, the metrics, just the computer data, if you're looking at your Kim Palms, your net rankings, your Bart Torviks, they should be in the 1 seed conversation. Now, what is kind of dragging them back just a little bit, what has them on the fringe there, which has them as the top 2 seed at this time with plenty of potential to get into that 1 seed conversation, is the fact that their wins above bubble and their strength of record have not quite moved up into that same tier as those top teams in college basketball to this point. It has been steadily rising, and they have therefore steadily risen up bracketology. You look at other teams that are interesting here at the top of the bracket, and I think Kansas is among the most interesting because they have not gotten consistent results. They have not been able to string together everything night in and night out. But I do think they're still very much in the mix for a 2 seed, as they have everything you need. You can watch them and believe that is one of the top teams in college basketball. You look at the talent that they have, the depth that they have, and then you look at some of their losses and you say, well, this guy was out injured. And that is something that the committee is allowed to look at. So I think that Kansas right there on the cusp of that 2 seed conversation as well. Iowa State has just dropped out of it with a kind of shocking just run of results. And I know they've played some really good teams here, but to just keep dropping games, they've got to get things stabilized there at Iowa State if they're going to keep on rolling. Now, we can go through the middle of the bracket here, and we could pick out individual teams and we can talk about them here and there, but that would probably lead us to a 2-3 hour podcast. So we're going to kind of condense it here. And when we talk about these middle teams, I'm going to talk a little bit more generally, not going to necessarily get into the full-on resumes that we're looking at. But I will say this. We have seen, especially over the last couple of weeks, a lot of movement in this category. And it's not necessarily a shock that we see this, because what we're looking at this time of year is teams that are able to knock off one of those teams I just mentioned. If they can pull off an upset like that, somebody who's projected to host a regional, that does so much for their net ranking, for wins above bubble, for all of those metrics that you look at. Not to mention the eye test and the quadrant system. Okay, it all comes together. Picking up an upset win helps you in every way you can get help. And so they might jump from 6 to 4. Well, then you look at the team who was the last team on the 4 line, and well, they didn't do anything wrong, but they also weren't impressive. Like we didn't really pay much attention to their game because they were playing somebody who isn't even on the bubble conversation. So they dropped down to the 5 seed line. And this will go back and forth because you know what? The next week, that team that jumped up above, they might take a loss. And so they're going to now drop back down into the 5 seed spot. So there is a lot of fluctuation going on in that range because they all, if you look, have very similar records. A lot of those teams are going to have almost identical records. You're going to look through and try to separate by quad one wins, by how many quad 3 and 4 losses they have, and you're going to try to create some separation in that way in order to give you more clarity on who belongs where in these conversations. Then we talk a little bit more about the bubble. And that is where generally you'll see quite a bit of chaos, but it's been stable over the past couple of weeks. And I think part of that is that these teams are all kind of going through the same line of results. Like we're seeing when some of the bubble teams get a good win, it seems like a lot of them get a good win together. When they all take a bad loss, it seems like it's not hurting them as much because it seems like, well, 3 other teams in that conversation also had a loss that we scratched our heads at. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out because there is a pretty established bubble at this point. I really don't see anyone kind of soaring in from outside of that next 4 out that can realistically reach the NCAA tournament at this point. Now, of course, we will talk about next month. We'll start talking about bid stealers because the way that the tournament format is set up, where we are able to get a conference champion who had no chance at reaching the bubble, therefore making us consider teams that we just had in the field as conference champions on the bubble, it can shift a lot of things. We saw last year where the 10 seed was where we were playing a play-in game in Dayton. And that is something that rarely happens the way that this bracket is set up, but we had so many upsets from teams that were not going to make the tournament otherwise that we end up in that position. How will things play out this year? Only time will tell. I would project that it will not be that severe. I think right now we are very steadily trending towards both play-in games being an 11 seed. Do not think we will drop to a 12 seed, but that is on the radar. That one is possible. Okay, but I would not bet on it to this point as we speak today. When we come back on the other side, we will talk about the NBA draft, some of the prospects that you need to know ahead of this final month of college basketball right here on 3 True Values. Thanks for tuning in. Welcome back into 3 True Values as we keep rolling through the show today. We're talking NBA draft prospects here in the second segment. And I do want to run through, as we're talking about this, we've talked plenty about these top players, kind of the big time prospects, your Cooper Flags, Ace Baileys, Dylan Harpers. I want to talk a little bit more today about some of the middle of the first round guys, some of the late first round guys who you're going to see their name in my upcoming mock draft, give you a little bit better understanding of why I have certain guys in that range. And then look, if you want more NBA draft content, please reach out, submit questions for our Tuesday mailbag episodes. That's every other Tuesday. I am happy to talk about any of these prospects who I watch regularly, take notes on, and move through the rankings. It's a very fluid process. So if you at any point are curious about my thoughts on a prospect, a specific type of prospect, a group of prospects, please do not hesitate. Send those questions. I can either attempt to answer it in column form or, like I said, on our Tuesday mailbag episodes. And then after the college basketball season, we will get a significant increase in in NBA draft content here on this channel. I do plan to continue doing shows, talk about the top prospects, talk about the group that we're going to talk about today, talk about second round prospects, guys who might go to the G League. We will get into as much of it as we can from now until June when the selections are made. But today, I want to start off with some point guards. I want to have a conversation about where some certain players stand because we can talk, like I said, Dylan Harper, Jeremiah Fears, even Yegor Dimon, who has fallen down the board, but I think we've talked about him before. He is a great passer. The shot has got to come around. The scoring ability has got to come around, and it's still to be determined on a nightly basis if he's able to do that at BYU in the Big 12. And then also some projection kind of questions that you have to address as a scout or as an organization. Will the issues that he faces be resolved by the more open, widespread, spaced out court in the NBA? That's all we'll say on him for now, though. Like I said, plenty time to talk about everyone. I do want to discuss Boogie Fland because Boogie Fland's kind of body of work seems to be done. He suffered a season-ending injury, and Arkansas has gone on to look better since he left. Or, excuse me, not left, but went down. And I don't think that's any kind of demerit on him. Now, it could impact his NBA draft stock because this is the type of thing that teams will look at when they are determining what kind of prospect they want. If this is a quote unquote winning prospect. And sometimes that's not fair. And I think that's particularly the case with Boogie Fland because Boogie Fland was kind of carrying Arkansas at times early in the season. Him, along with Adutiero, seemed to be the engine of that Arkansas group. Now, what we saw is that Nelly Davis, John L. Davis from FAU, the transfer, really, really struggled to find his footing. He could not get things going after the transfer to Arkansas. It just so happens that when Boogie Fland goes down injured, John L. Davis is able to take on a little bit more similar role to what he did at FAU. He's able to start to get his rhythm back, and now he looks like a much improved player. That also, him being more of a positive and in a different role, allowed them to bring in another player to the floor who is more comfortable in his role. And so, if anything, I think this is a roster building issue, not an issue with Boogie Fland. We're seeing everyone kind of get to play where they want to play, where they play best, now that they're down a ball handler in the offense. But I do think that Boogie Fland has been a guy who improved throughout the early portion of the season until his injury. I thought he played hard for a lot of the time he was out there. I like his ability to kind of be a hub for the offense. Like I said, he kind of carried the Arkansas team at times. Now, do I think that he is ready to come into the NBA and just like be a starting point guard? No. Particularly with the injury, he's going to have a development time, a lead up time where he's going to have to adjust to everything that's going on. He's also not a particularly big point guard in a league where we now see 6'5", 6'6" guys entering the league at this position. At 6'2", he's going to have to learn how to use his body, how to use his athleticism, and the determination. He's going to have to be a gritty guard if he's going to make it at the next level. Tyrese Proctor is a name that I don't know if he will land in the first round, but he's an interesting name to discuss because he's a guy who can play on or off the ball, has played off the ball much more this season for Duke, and I think that adds a little bit of value because he does have some of the size that is needed and has upped his shooting without having the ball in his hands. So if you can play him at the point guard when needed, play him at shooting guard alongside high-level point guards in the NBA, and he can provide you that shooting touch along with the defense, I think it does increase his value into that first-round conversation. Now, a name that I want to bring up, college basketball fans will not be familiar with, is Sergio Delaria from Spain. He plays at Valencia, and this guy has moved rapidly up my draft board. This is one of my players who I am very high on at this point. You will see him in my mock draft coming out later today. This is a tall player, 6'5", 6'6", depending on where you see him listed. Appears to have good length He runs the offense when he's out there for his professional team. And this is a team that is playing in some of the biggest competitions in Europe. Like, this is not one of these small kind of developmental youth leagues that we see certain players come out of. He is playing real basketball against grown men and former NBA players in a lot of cases. I believe he plays with Semi Ojeleye, who, of course, played in the NBA and college basketball before that. So, what is he doing that is so impressive? Well, he has a very fluid shot, which he knocks down at an extremely high rate, and then he makes the right reads a lot of times. I like his ability to get to a spot and make the right pass. And then I think he's got a lot of ability to play off the ball if he's next to a guy who can handle those point guard responsibilities, which, like I said with Proctor, drastically increases your value when you talk about being the type of backup player that you're going to be early on in your NBA career. As we move forward, I now want to talk about a couple of shooting guards. First off, Ian Jackson, whose draft stock has been up and down, but seems to really not leave the range that it is in. It's interesting to me because sometimes I'm like, well, I'm high on him right now. Like, I think he can do this. Sometimes I think, oh man, I just don't know if he can do this. But I don't find myself moving him drastically up or down the board when I do so, for whatever reason. Ian Jackson, though, is a guy who is electric, instant offense, but not much of a playmaker. He's not going to create for a lot of his teammates while he's out there on the floor. He's going to put up shots, which in the NBA means that you either have to be a star, like an all-star level player. Sometimes even above that, you have to be an all NBA level player to do it for a winning team, or you have to do it off the bench in a very specific role, similar to what a Jordan Clarkson is allowed to do with the Utah Jazz. So it's an interesting role. We talked a little bit about Adu Tiero. He has taken a big leap at Arkansas. I think his defense continues to be something that teams will covet. That kind of body type is rare. There's not a lot of guys who have that kind of look that he has. I think it will serve him well on draft night. Jace Richardson is kind of almost the opposite of Adu Tiero. He is a kind of smaller two guard, and in a league where you're looking for size, you're looking for versatility, Jace Richardson is an interesting player because he does not have a lot of that. But every time you watch him play for Michigan State, he seems to make the right play. I mean, whether it's taking the shot when you're supposed to, swinging the ball when you're supposed to swing it, rebounding, steals, blocks, like he just does all the little things, and he seems to make the right play every time. And that is what you want coming off your bench to play next to somebody who's a star. And so if you're Jace Richardson, yes, the fit is going to be very important. I think if you can put him next to a lead guard who potentially can take on more defensive assignments, I think that would be a great fit for him. Or somewhere that they have that versatile wing who can kind of guard the more athletic perimeter options, the bigger perimeter options, while Richardson guards the guy in the corner, plays more team defense. I think that's an option for him. Josan Sanan is really an enigma. I mean, he's dealt with injuries this year, so we haven't gotten to see him night in and night out. Look, he's got some really electric elements to his game. I'm not sure the consistency is there for me to have him firmly in the first round at this time, though, given everyone else who is on the board and available in that range. As we continue talking, though, I do want to just mention briefly Rasheer Fleming and Alex Karaban, the power forwards for St. Joe's and UConn, respectively. Alex Karaban, a veteran guy, like we know his story. You've seen him play. If you watch college basketball in recent years, he is the space it out. He's a solid team defender. He can knock down threes. He's added a little bit of scoring kind of at different levels to his game over his career at UConn. Don't think he'll really show that off at the professional level, but he is going to be a solid player for somebody in the NBA. And then Rasheer Fleming, kind of that versatile. I think last year with Deron Holmes, the versatile big at a mid major, playing in the A10, and people wondering, does it translate? And the true answer is we won't know until he plays in the NBA. We didn't even get a glimpse to try to get an idea based on what Deron Holmes did because he tore his Achilles in the preseason. So Rasheer Fleming, he can shoot from the perimeter. He's got some versatility, getting downhill as a scorer. I think he is a solid defender. I think he'll be able to hold up at that end. The question is going to be, can he play kind of that modern power forward role and have to guard some of these guys that nowadays are playing power forward? Sometimes you have to guard a 7-footer who is able to dribble, pass, and shoot. That's going to be kind of the challenge for him as he steps up in a major way, the level of competition. And then JoJo Tugler, want to touch on him. JoJo Tugler is kind of this year's Ryan Dunn. What does he give you on offense? I don't know. Maybe nothing. Probably offensive rebounds, I would say, is the biggest thing. But on defense, this guy is incredible. A freak athlete. He grabs a lot of rebounds. He blocks shots at a high rate. He is an excellent weak side defender. His help defense is incredible. He can get steals. I like his ability for a guy who is as big and as strong as he is. Yes, he holds up in the post, but he can also step out. When you need him to guard somebody on the perimeter, he is able to do that at least at a capable level. And that makes him kind of an interesting tail end of the first round prospect as you look at these teams who they don't need anyone to score. Like they've got the star power to where what they need is somebody who can give that star, a possession or two off on the other end of the floor throughout the regular season. I think he's the kind of guy who could potentially make that happen. We look at the centers, and Thomas Sorber is an interesting one that I want to talk about briefly. At Georgetown, haven't talked a lot about him, but he has slowly moved up into this first round conversation. He just does a lot of the things you want a center to do. He rebounds at a high rate. He's really good at putting things back into the rim. He's kind of a vacuum down there. Just get the ball in, get it up. And he's shown some signs he's trying to kind of extend that game out to 15 feet, the 3-point line. Not sure if it's there yet. Don't think I would count on him doing that in the first couple of years at least, once he's a pro, as we know that all of these guys, even the ones who have never shot a three before, eventually end up attempting it just to see if it's an option. We saw Zach Edey shoot threes early in this year and still does occasionally after taking, four his entire college career, his 4-year career. So, yes, we will see how Thomas Sorber turns out on the offensive end in terms of production, like creating shots or creating points, but he can finish and he can provide you with the rebounding that you need on both ends of the floor. Also picks up those steals and those blocks just off of hustle plays a lot of times. He is willing to get in there and mix it up. When the ball hits the floor, he will get on there occasionally and go for it. Danny Wolf is the last player we're going to talk about here before we wrap up this segment, though. At Michigan, had an incredible step back highlight the other day, and this guy just keeps slowly moving up the board because he's doing things that we don't see 7-foot centers do. He's got incredible skill on the offensive end. He has great court vision for a guy his size. And he's going to be the type of center that we see in the NBA a lot, who stands at the top of the key and becomes a pseudo initiator. Like the point guard is going to hand him the ball so that they can get into different actions. They're going to run that high pick and roll and sometimes put the ball in his hands and run off of him as he holds the ball, trying to get an open look at the basket, whether that means popping out to the 3-point line or making that cut into the lane. He also can hold the ball up and find those slashers as well. So I think Danny Wolf definitely fits in the NBA. The question will be, how valuable do teams view the skills that he has? Do they think that he's a guy who can do that with a starting lineup? Or do they think that he's a guy who can be an initiator with the second group, which is a little bit less valuable, probably lands him tail end of the first round or at the start of the second? When we come back, we'll get you the games of the week and get you out of here right here on 3 True Values. Welcome back into Three True Values. We wrap up the show with the games of the week, getting you ready for everything you need to watch over the coming days. Of course, the NBA trade deadline is later today, but after that concludes, you're going to want to check out Maryland and Ohio State. That's going to be a good one there in the Big Ten. Ohio State, a bubble team. Maryland rapidly improving their stock as a potential regional host. St. John's and UConn is our game of the day on Friday, a ranked matchup in the Big East, a big one for UConn, who is really trying to build their resume back up. They took some bad losses, had some slip ups, and now are kind of in need of a good result. On Saturday, we're going to go with Duke and Clemson because it's Dick Vitale's return to broadcasting, kind of a legend in the game. So I would go Duke and Clemson. We also get a chance to see Cooper Flag, get to see that Duke team that, like I said, right there at the top of the country. Nothing wrong with watching them. If you want to have a second game, I would go Texas Tech and Arizona. That one I think will be the best basketball because those are two teams that are rapidly moving up the board in every metric. They are two of the best and most underrated Big 12 teams that we have. So a showdown of those two right there. Then on Sunday, we're going to watch Memphis and Temple. Don't think this will be a particularly just great matchup. We just have not watched Memphis in a while. And it's easy to forget that because they're in the AAC and they're not playing competition, they still have one of the best resumes, like on paper, of any of the teams in the country. They certainly had one of the best non-conference resumes in the country. Only Auburn could match them in terms of quad 1 and quad 2 wins during that portion of the schedule. Now, of course, they kind of are just trying to avoid landmines. So we'll check them out, see what they have to offer. And then on Monday, we've got Houston and Baylor, a Texas showdown there. Baylor, another team kind of trying to stabilize things, trying to get back in the mix, trying to get back on track. Houston trying to hold on to the top of the Big 12 standings. Then on Tuesday, we have got a rematch. Tennessee and Kentucky, that kind of blossoming rivalry in the SEC over the past few years, several years now, really. That has been one of the big rivalry matchups in the conference. So you'll want to check out that one for sure. And then on Wednesday, as we wrap things up, we are going to go to Oklahoma and Missouri. Missouri all the way up into the top 25. Oklahoma still in the NCAA tournament picture. They look solid. They have kind of stabilized things since the start of SEC play. But that does not mean they can have another skid, because if they do, they could be in trouble again on the bubble. So big game there in the SEC. By the time those games are over, we will be back with another episode of Three True Values, keeping you up to date on all things college basketball. Thanks for tuning in.